For years, everyone believed Japan would always dominate the auto industry. Then, China changed the rules, and Toyota quietly began changing its entire strategy. The question is this: is Toyota simply trying to survive, or is it trying to protect Japan's industrial future? Because when you look closely at the decisions this company has made over the last several years, they stop looking random. They start looking like a plan. Let's start with the threat nobody saw coming, at least not at this speed. A decade ago, if you asked anyone in Detroit, Stuttgart, or Toyota City who the future competitors in the auto industry would be, almost nobody would have said China. China was seen as a place where cars were assembled, not designed. That assumption did not just age poorly, it collapsed completely. Chinese companies led by BYD did something nobody expected. They built an entire vertical chain from batteries to software to manufacturing, and they built it at a scale that let them undercut almost everyone else on price while still improving quality year after year. For Japan, this was not a distant story. It was a direct hit. Japanese automakers, and Toyota in particular, had built their global reputation on reliability, efficiency, and steady incremental improvement. That formula worked for decades, but it was built for a world where change happened slowly. China's rise did not happen slowly. It happened in what felt like a single business cycle, and it forced every executive in Nagoya and Tokyo to ask an uncomfortable question. What happens to Japan's auto industry if China simply outbuilds it? That question brings us to why Toyota matters so much in this story, and why this is not just about one company's balance sheet. Toyota is not a normal car company. It is closer to an industrial organism that Japan's entire economy is wrapped around. Its own integrated reporting describes its factories as employment hubs, places where entire towns and regions have grown up around supplier networks that depend on Toyota's production lines staying active. When people talk about the health of Japan's manufacturing base, they are, whether they realize it or not, often talking about Toyota's health. The scale here is difficult to overstate. Toyota's most recent annual report shows a company selling vehicles across Japan, North America, Europe, and dozens of other regions, at volumes large enough to meaningfully move national trade figures. This is a company whose decisions ripple outward into steel production, electronics manufacturing, logistics, and hundreds of thousands of jobs that never show up on a car window sticker. So when Toyota shifts strategy, it is not just adjusting a product lineup. It is nudging the entire industrial foundation of a country. That is why Toyota's response to China's rise cannot be understood as one company protecting its market share. It has to be understood as a company protecting an entire ecosystem. Because if Toyota falters, the shockwaves do not stop at its own factory gates. They travel through every supplier, every regional economy built around those suppliers, and ultimately through Japan's broader identity as one of the world's manufacturing superpowers. So how is Toyota actually responding? This is where the long game begins, and it is far more interesting than a simple story of chasing China's EV numbers. Toyota did not panic and rush to become a pure electric vehicle company overnight. Instead, it built what looks like a multi-track strategy, one that keeps hybrids as a financial engine while quietly building the next generation of battery and software technology in the background. Hybrids matter here more than people give them credit for. While much of the industry poured resources into pure electric vehicles, Toyota kept leaning on hybrid technology, both because it already dominated that space and because hybrids continued generating strong, dependable cash flow. That cash flow is not just profit for shareholders, it is fuel for research and development, the kind of long-term investment that does not show results in a single fiscal year, but pays off over a full decade. Part of that investment is going into solid-state batteries, a technology that could fundamentally change charging speed, range, and safety compared to today's lithium-ion batteries. Toyota has repeatedly emphasized this technology as central to its future, and it has partnered with companies like Idemitsu to build out the supply chain needed to actually manufacture these batteries at scale. This is not a side project. This is Toyota trying to leapfrog the current battery generation entirely, rather than simply competing on today's terms. At the same time, Toyota has been restructuring how it operates specifically inside China, and this is where the plan starts to look less like defense and more like adaptation at a very high level. Reuters has reported that Toyota is targeting a dramatic increase in its China production, aiming for at least 2.5 million vehicles per year by the year 2030. That is a significant jump from its prior peak of roughly 1,840,000 vehicles back in 2022. This is not a company retreating from the Chinese market. This is a company trying to compete inside it, on on its own terms. Even more telling is how Toyota is trying to compete. According to the same reporting, Toyota has set an internal ambition of developing around 15 self-developed electric vehicle models, with a goal of producing roughly 1 million electric vehicles per year by 2027. That target has been described as an internal ambition rather than a locked-in public commitment, but the direction is unmistakable. Toyota is not just building EVs, it is trying to build them with far more input from local Chinese teams, giving regional engineers and chief engineers more autonomy over design and development decisions. This is a real departure from how Toyota has traditionally operated. For most of its history, the company has centralized major engineering decisions in Japan, then adapted those designs for regional markets. In China now, Toyota appears to be flipping part of that model, letting local teams drive development in a market that is moving too fast for decisions to bounce back and forth between Nagoya and Shanghai. It is a subtle shift, but it is a significant one, because it shows a company willing to change its own internal culture in order to survive in a market it clearly refuses to abandon. Now here is the part that most viewers miss when they hear about EV competition. Toyota did not follow everyone else into an all-electric rush, and that decision has been heavily criticized over the years. Critics argued Toyota was behind, slow, even in denial about where the industry was heading, but when you step back and look at the numbers, a different picture emerges. Toyota's decision to keep hybrids central to its lineup was not stubbornness. It was a calculated bet that the transition to full electrification would take longer and cost more than most competitors were willing to admit publicly. That bet allowed Toyota to keep generating stable profit, while competitors burned through cash trying to scale electric vehicle production before the infrastructure, battery supply chains, and consumer demand were fully ready. In other words, Toyota was not late, it was patient. And patience, when you are the anchor of an entire national industrial base, is not a weakness. It is arguably the only responsible strategy available, because a stumble at Toyota's scale does not just hurt one company's stock price, it threatens the livelihoods tied to its enormous supplier network. So if Toyota is not simply chasing China, and it is not simply defending against China either, what exactly is happening? This is where the story connects to something much bigger than one company, and that is Japan's broader industrial policy. Japan's government, through agencies like the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, has been actively pushing to reduce the country's dependence on China in critical sectors, particularly batteries and semiconductors. This is not a hidden agenda, it is public policy openly discussed, aimed at strengthening supply chain resilience and encouraging what analysts often call friend-shoring, meaning shifting critical manufacturing toward trusted partners rather than relying heavily on a single dominant supplier. Toyota's moves fit neatly into this broader national picture. Its investment in solid-state battery supply chains, its push toward localized manufacturing, and its focus on next-generation technology all align with what Japan's government has been encouraging across the entire industrial sector. This does not mean Toyota is secretly taking orders from Tokyo or running some coordinated covert campaign against Chinese competitors. The far more accurate picture is that Toyota, as Japan's most important industrial company, naturally moves in the same direction as national policy, because both are responding to the exact same set of pressures and incentives. This brings us to what we might call the hidden plan, though hidden may be the wrong word entirely. It is not hidden in the sense of secret documents or covert meetings. It is hidden in plain sight, spread across earnings calls, supplier announcements, government policy papers, and battery partnership press releases that most people never bother connecting together. When you do connect them, a coherent strategy emerges. Keep hybrids as the financial backbone. Invest heavily in next-generation batteries and software. Localize aggressively in China rather than retreat from it. Support national efforts to build resilient supply chains outside of total dependence on any single country. None of these pieces on their own looks dramatic. A hybrid sales report is not exciting. A battery supply chain partnership does not trend on social media. But together they form something that looks a lot like an industrial strategy built for survival across decades, not quarters. And that distinction matters enormously because most companies and most viewers watching business news think in much shorter time horizons. Here is a question worth sitting with for a moment before we wrap up. If China continues improving its electric vehicles at the current pace, and if battery costs keep falling the way they have over the last several years, does Toyota's patient, hybrid-funded strategy still hold up by the early 2030s? Or does the gap eventually become too large to close no matter how much cash flow hybrids continue generating in the meantime? That is genuinely an open question, and it is one worth debating in the comments because reasonable analysts disagree on the answer. What we can say with more confidence confidence is that Toyota is not a passive bystander in this story, and it is not a company blindly copying whatever the industry trend of the moment happens to be. It is behaving like an organization that understands its own outsized importance to an entire national economy, and it is making decisions that reflect that weight. Whether that ultimately proves to be brilliant patience or a costly miscalculation will likely become clear over the next 5 to 10 years, as China's EV dominance either continues accelerating or starts running into its own limits around cost, overcapacity, and global trade friction. What is clear right now is this: Toyota's greatest innovation over the coming decade may not turn out to be a specific car model or a single battery breakthrough. It may end up being the long-term industrial strategy itself, the willingness to fund a slower transition using hybrid profits, to localize aggressively in China rather than abandon it, and to align, whether directly or simply by shared circumstance, with Japan's broader push for industrial resilience. That is not a conspiracy. It is something arguably more impressive. It is a plan built for decades, executed quietly enough that most people only notice the pieces once someone lays them out side by side. So the next time you see a headline about hybrid sales numbers, or a small battery partnership announcement, or a quiet reshuffling of Toyota's China leadership, remember that these small stories are rarely isolated. They are threads in a much larger industrial narrative, one that will shape what ends up parked in driveways across the world for the next generation. And if you want to make sure you are not caught off guard by what comes next in this industry, join us here, because these shifts rarely announce themselves loudly until it is too late to see them coming.